Okay, good morning, everyone. So the shiur has two parts, actually. I have to confess that as of late last night, I was going to put a text on the WhatsApp group saying this would just be a short shiur of 10 minutes just to tidy up some of the loose ends that were left over. I was completely stuck on the sugya. As you were aware, we had the shit of the run that didn't make sense to us. We had a rosh that didn't make sense to us. And we had a Rambam and various other bits of evidence that there were these two dinim in the melachot of Mochek, which we thought we had read the sources correctly, but it was very frustrating. Where do these two concepts or conceptualizations, the melachot of Mochek, come from? And it wasn't spelled out in the Rambam. And, you didn't clearly say there's two ways of understanding Mochek. These are two others who told us. Therefore, all I was planning to do in today's shiur was just tidy up some loose ends, and in so doing, create yet further difficulties for ourselves. Baruch Hashem, as of this morning, the sugya has fallen into place at long last, and I have to say what I'm going to say is really obvious. I want to actually quote Edward Black, who once gave me an enormous amount of nachas. I don't even know if Edward, you remember saying this, but a couple of years ago, you said to me, I've now realized every time we learn the sugya, we start off fighting it. And when we stop fighting the sugya, then we're able to hear what it says. And I feel this is such a bedrock of what Talmud Torah means. And every time we're resistant to what the sugya is telling us because we come into with our own preconceived notions. And it's only when we're finally able to unblock them. And then it becomes obvious. Now, I can't pretend what I'm going to share is simple and that I completely understand. But it's become obvious to me that stubbornly, I was restricting the sugya to my own concepts, and therefore the sugya kept on falling apart, and we weren't hearing what the Rishonim were really saying. So what I want to do is finish off a nugget left over from last time, and then step back and relook at what we had seen up to now, and I think try and reframe it. And I hope that even if what I say now is fairly fast, I hope that the recording people will be able to listen to the recording if they want and follow it through further. So we left our last shiur with understanding that there are two. We started off. I came into the sugya with a chakira in Mochek, and this was my original sin. And the two sutatim we had in Mochek was either that Mochek is preparation for writing. It's Mochek al manas lichtov, and just like there's a whole series of melachos which are about preparing paper for writing, or parchment more accurately for writing, assuming there's a melachah of Mochek, which is removing writing in order to clear space on paper to write something else. That was one stud in Mochek. And in that vision of Mochek, the Almanas Lichtov is the essence of the Melacha. It's Mochek Almanas Lichtov. The other side of Mochek is that it's deletion or erasing of information. And the erasure of information is the Melacha, except it needs to be positive, not negative. It needs to be metakin, not makalkel, productive, not destructive, and therefore there has to be a purpose in doing it. What would be a positive purpose in erasing? Either in order to write something else in its space, or because you don't want the information to exist, like an IOU or something of the sort. And we saw various pieces of evidence in the Mishnah. The Halacha brought some evidence for this. We looked at various other sources that evidence this. The Yerushalmi and the Rambam also came to the conclusion, really adopted this stance, that there are these two forms of Mochek. And based on that, and we saw the Rambam didn't really spell out where these two forms come from, and we struggled to understand what the common denominator between these two forms are, because they're very different melachos. One is the melachah of preparing paper, and the other one is of erasing information, like the twin of Kosev. Kosev is creating information, and Mochek is erasing information. These are two very different melachos. Why are they combined into one category? And it's never spelled out that they're two co-others, or an oven at all, or the like. Now, the final points really I was planning to make on the sugya were the following 2 points. The first was a Shiur Adam, in which the Shiur Adam takes this idea of the Tosefta. The Tosefta says that you're even Chai for Mochek if you erase tishtush or sha'ava, an ink spill or a wax mess on a wax board. You're Chai for Mochek in those scenarios because you're clearing the space for writing. And that's enough to make the melacha, even though there's no information being erased at all. Right? There's no lettering that you're erasing at all. So Shiur Adam says that every time you wash your hands, he says if you have hands which are nit pachmu, if they have pechom, if they have soot on them, and you rinse them off from the black of the pot. So pots used to be sooty and give off soot, which is carbon, very fine carbon powder, which gets into the, like coal miners, gets into the crevices of the skin and so on. If you wash that off, then even that is the melacha of Mochek, because you're clearing tishtush dia, you're clearing coloring off your hands which clears a space for writing. Now, no one after the Chayei Adam was completely convinced by this reasoning, and I don't think it's really entered the practical halachic system. And the reason is because whilst this may be cleaning, the hands aren't made for kasav. They're not a place which is naturally a place of writing, and therefore, even though removal of pecham from the hands, from a piece of paper, which has sooty or ink stains, maybe the melacha of mochek, because we're preparing it for writing, removal of ink from the hands, despite the Chayei Adam, wouldn't appear to be that the case. Chayei Adam is a very, very senior posting. I wouldn't say this myself. I wouldn't dare pick a fight with the Chayei Adam myself, but the later posting don't go with it because of this difficulty. Now, sorry, you're looking puzzled.
I'm confused why we assume the Chayei Adam believes that it's because you can write in your hands afterwards, as to the model.
So it appeared to me, based on my chakira, that which again we have two tzadim over here. Tzad number one is erasure of information. There's no erasure of information by removing chacham. The other tzad we had was clearing space for writing, which therefore would appear to be the tzad of the Chayei Adam. And he spells this out. He said, even though your intention was not to do machak hamanas lichtov, nonetheless, Rabbanon is also to do so. So what he appears to be saying is there's no intentionality. You didn't clear your hands to write on them, but nonetheless, that's what you've done. You've created a writable space, and therefore it's also midrabanon. You're not chayav for it. It's not the melachot d'oraisa because you didn't clear it on manas lichtov, but nonetheless, it's also rabbanon. The counter argument to the Chayei Adam would be, it's true that if you clear paper without intention to rewrite, you could hear that would be an issa d'rabbanon because you've cleared a writing surface. But hands are not a writing surface at all. And therefore, clearing a writing surface would be a drabbanon extension, even though you have no intentionality. But clearing hands, which aren't a writing surface, would be different. So that was the understanding of the Chayei Adam. The final point I was going to make was as follows. We have our sugya, back to our sugya. We've wandered far from our sugya, but let's get back to our sugya. So our sugya tells us that if you erase a large letter, then which has enough space to write two letters in its place, you are chayav. Now, if the melacha is mochek al manas lichtov, the melacha is fundamentally a preparation for writing, then I understand, even though I've only erased one letter, but I've created enough space for writing two letters, and if I have a share of the melacha of two letters, and if I'll be chayav for it. However, if the melacha is deletion of information, erasing information, I've only erased information of one letter, not two letters, and therefore I shouldn't have the share to make you chayav. So the final chiddush I was going to suggest on the topic is that when the Brisa says that mochek is chayav for clearing, I should say, now which one of these two models is correct? Is it deletion of information or is it preparing for writing? The answer is we said both. That's what we were like, both the melacha. So when the Brisa says you are chayav for erasing one letter which has the space of two, that's when the tikkun of the melacha, the positive outcome of the melacha, is clearing space. However, if the tikkun of the melacha is like the scenario of the Pri Megadim brought in the Halacha, which is I just want to erase the information because it's an IOU, in that case, the chashivas of the melacha is not the preparation of space for writing. The chashivas of the melacha is the erasure of information. And since the erasure of information is the melacha, I've only erased one letter, not two letters, and therefore I should be potter because I haven't done enough of a share of mochek. So this was how I understood this was to me enough minute that came out from this whole discussion. And again, it left me deeply dissatisfied because the reasoning is very beautiful. It's a very nice sort of halachic point that when you're mochek with enough space to write two other letters, you're only chayav where it's type A mechika. It's on manas lichtov mechika, but not when it's type B mechika, which is erasing of information. But again, it's a little bit sotum in the Brisa because the Gemara doesn't say that. The Gemara just says, Gemara doesn't spell out that this depends whether this is type A or type B mechika. And that's why we left things that there were two types of mechika, which effectively function as two separate melachas, despite our discomfort with that idea, because the Rambam doesn't really spell it out as two separate melachas. He seems to be happy to make one stew in which he merges these two melachas completely. So this is where I found myself basically at the end of the sugya. Until after a lot of ridding myself of assumptions, it became clear to me that I made a bit of a mess up of the sugya, and that mochek probably, I still don't know exactly the right terminology to use, but it would appear that the correct definition of the malacha of mochek is actually neither of these two sadodim, but a third way of conceptualizing the malacha, which is something like correcting a mistake. That's the way we should think of mochek, as correcting a mistake, fixing a mistake. And the whole sugya revolves about how far or narrowly we define the definition of the malacha of fixing a mistake. So let's go through the sources one by one. The Ran says that mochek amanas lichtov, where you have a big letter which you are erasing in order to write in its place two smaller letters, has to be where the two smaller letters are akin to the large letter which I've rid myself of. It has to be the same sort of font, the same sort of script, roughly the same sort of size, even though they're somewhat smaller. So said the Ran. And we were left completely reeling with this Ran. We had no idea what to make of it. Why should it be the same thing? Because if mechika is preparing paper for writing, who cares whether it's the same letters or not? And I think the answer to the question is, the Ran is coming in, and I'm deliberately ordering the Rishonim now in this order. The Ran is coming in assuming that the malacha of mochek is fixing a mistake, which after all is what happened in the Mishkan. I was writing the letters on the kroshim in order to link them together, and I accidentally wrote the wrong letters. I'm fixing a mistake. Says the Ran, if what you're going to put in its place is too radically different, that's not fixing a mistake, that's not correcting an error, that's writing something else completely new. That's erasing and putting something else completely new in its place. That's not fixing a mistake, that's erasing and rewriting. A rewriting would be the malacha, of course. If you wrote now two letters in a different font, you'd be chayav for Kosev. But the malacha of mochek is a process of fixing, a preparation for fixing or repairing. And preparation for fixing and repairing is what the malacha is. By the way, again, this is somewhat comparable. It's somewhat of a conceptual question, but I subconsciously dipped on this in unknotting and knotting, mati almanas likshur, and I never fleshed out the thoughts till this morning, till late last night when it hit me. When you unknot and reknot, I want to ask almost like a philosophical question or abstract question, metaphysical question. Are you redoing the same knot again, or is it a new knot? So with knots, we almost don't know what that means, right? Because knots don't carry information in the same way. But if I have two strings and I unknot them and then I reknot them again, is this a recreation of the old knot or a removal of the old knot? Now, we discussed this a little bit in halachic terms, believe it or not, and I didn't realize the full implication of what we were discussing then. What happens, Kosher almanas, Matzah almanas liksha, by the way, was a similar malacha. When you unravel a knot, you're chayav if it's almanas liksha to reknot. And we had the similar discussion there. Now, we discussed the scenario where you unknot something, planning to cut off the ends of another thread and then reknot it. So when you unknot two ends of a thread and reknot it, seemingly that's just a recreation of the same knot because it's joining the same two threads. What happens though if I'm going to unknot it and I'm going to attach another thread to it? Is that matir almanas liksha or not? Well, it's not the same knot anymore because I've detached thread A and B in order to reattach thread A and C. So now that clearly is a new knot that's been created. And we touched upon that when we learned matzah almanas likshur, whether that's called matzah almanas likshur or not. We spoke about sois almanas livnos, destroying in order to rebuild. We never looked at this in detail because it wasn't one of our sugyas, but we touched upon it. The one says almanas livnos bin koma. And again, the same sort of question, when I rebuild, is that the old building re-emerging? Obviously different, but is it the same building, a different building? I don't want to go into all the melachos. These are profound sorts of philosophical questions. Here we're just going very simply. The Ran says, the Ran is of the belief that mochek almanas lichtov is correcting a mistake. All the Rishonim of that belief, the Rambam, the Rosh, everyone is of that belief. They are simply arguing over the parameters of how far we stretch this idea. So the Ran says it's only the malacha of mochek almanas lichtov, where here at least, where we're struggling to find the two letters, where it's a similar sort of letters that I'm going to be writing in the place. If I'm mochek two letters, maybe even if I write two other letters there, it's enough. But here where I'm being mochek almanas lichtov, where there's one letter that I'm erasing, it's only a correction if this one letter becomes two similar letters. If I destroy two letters and I write two other letters in their place, that's the correction of two letters for two letters. If I destroy one letter and I want to put two letters in place, there's an innovation happening here. It's two letters, there's only one letter originally. The Ran's answer to that question is, because it's the same style of letter, the same font, roughly the same size, that's a correction, that's not a complete creation of newness. It also brings a light on the Gemara. The Gemara sort of says, or the Brisa rather says, that there's an interesting paradox over here. that if you write one letter, you're potter. If you erase one letter, you're chayiv. Is the Gemara just playing? Is the Brisa just playing a sort of word game, a sort of interesting feature, or is there anything more profound in this Brisa? Is it telling me anything conceptual about the melacha? The Ran understands it's telling me something profoundly conceptual about the melacha, which is how can erasing one and the creation of two be considered a correction? I'm creating new information. It's not a correction, it's a recreation. And the Ran's answer to that question is, because they are the similar letters, similar fonts, you can legitimately call this correction rather than a recreation because they are similar enough. Now, the next source we saw was the Rosh. And our difficulty with the Rosh was that the Rosh was too casual and flippant about his change of model. Because the Rosh came in and said that misvara, I assumed that if you're mochek tishtush, if you're mochek an ink spill, that isn't the malacha of mochek. And then he says, but I saw later that I was wrong from the Tosefta, and the Tosefta says that you are chayiv for an erasure of an ink spill. And the answer must be, because always when you erase something, it's a mistake. Otherwise, you wouldn't be erasing. In the Mishkan, when they erased a base to write a gimel there because they put the wrong letter there, that's a mistake. And therefore, what difference does it make whether I'm erasing an ink spill or whether I'm erasing a letter? That must be the pshat in the Tosefta. But you see, the Rosh is sort of seeing the Tosefta as teaching him a chiddush. Now, if the chiddush of the Tosefta was, originally I thought mechika meant erasure of information, and now and therefore, how on earth could we chayiv for erasing an ink spill? There's no information in the ink spill. And then the chiddush of the Tosefta is no, the malacha is clearing paper. Then I understand the conversation of the Rosh. The Rosh originally thought it was erasure of information, and now the Rosh says no. You see, from the Tosefta, it's even clearing paper. But the Rosh never spells it out. That was the difficulty we have with the Rosh. The Rosh doesn't say this is a radical overhaul of the malacha in which I'm conceptualizing the malacha differently. He just says it must be that even this is included in the malacha. The answer to the question again is the Rosh is playing with the same idea. If mochek is correction and repair, preparation for repair, is it only when you've got a letter which you're now correcting and changing to another letter, that's the malacha? Or is it even the malacha when you have an ink spill which you're correcting of paper in order to repair, in order to put a different letter in its place? So the Rosh is expanding the category of mochek. I thought mochek was only correcting a letter, because that's a correction. Kamashman on the Tosefta, that mochek is even correcting an ink spill and putting a letter in its place. What's the logic? How did the Tosefta know to do this expansion? Because since what you're correcting is always a mistake, the Tosefta didn't think it was reasonable to make a difference between whether I'm correcting a letter or correcting an ink spill, because in most places I'm tidying up a mistake. We then saw the. Does this make sense?
Yes, it's still the correcting. It is now much more of an uplift.
So far, we haven't yet discussed this scenario. But then we saw, we can go in any order now, but then we saw the Rambam, for example, who said that even any mechika which has a tikkun to it could be enough. So now again, we have a fascinating correction, conceptual question in what we mean by correcting. If let's say I wrote something that was wrong, and I just want to erase it because it was wrong. I don't plan to write anything else in its place. Is that also called correction or not? How far do we stretch the idea of correction? Is correction also deletion? Was correction only fixing? Remember the scenario of the Yerushalmi, in which the Yerushalmi said you can do Mochik and Kosev by adding the little corner piece on a reish, dalad reish, converting one to the other. So if you erase the little corner piece, you are erasing a dalad and creating a reish. If you add a little corner piece, you are erasing a reish and creating a dalad. That's sort of a correction type model. What happens if I'm just erasing a letter? Is that a correction or not the malacha at all? Says the Pri Megadim, quoted by the Bir Halacha, or says the Rambam, any mechika which has a positive benefit to it is also called a melacha, because that's also a correction. So we expanded the definition of correcting it further. So we're on a journey. We have a Ran who saw the correction very narrowly, right? And the Ran saw the direct correction as only, at least in the case of one letter, as only being a correction of two letters when the same two letters could be written in space. Otherwise, it's a correction of one letter, not a correction of two letters. I may plan to write two letters there, but they're two different letters. I'm not correcting two letters. Mechika also needs a share of two letters. The chiddush of the Ram was when it's similar enough, that's enough to be a correction of two letters because I'm creating the space for two similar letters. Then we had the Rosh, who initially came in with a similar worldview, but learned from, not as far as the Ram, that has to be the same letters, learned from the Tishtush Diyai that even correcting ink spillage is enough. And then we see the Rambam, who says erasure of a letter is enough, even when I'm not planning to write in its place. The Pri Megadim, the erasure of a letter is enough, even when I'm not planning to write in its place, because that's correction of a mistake. Now we have yet a further extension. What happens if it wasn't a mistake? It's just no longer correct. That's the IOU scenario, the debt, the shtar chayiv. When I wrote it, it wasn't a mistake. It was perfectly correct. I owed you the money. But it's incorrect now in the sense that I no longer owe you the money. But when it was written, it wasn't a mistake. This is the chiddush of the Halacha, that even that is enough for Mochik, because even that is a correction in the sense that it's no longer accurate in line with the reality of the world in which this debt no longer exists, and therefore even the Mechika of that is considered Mochik. So we're playing, all the Rishonim are on the same page and understanding the essence of the Melacha is correction of mistake. And the question is, how far do we expand this correction of the mistake? Is it correction of a mistake? Or I don't think correction of mistake is even now, mistake is no longer the right word. Correction or alteration of kasav is something around that is what the Melacha is. But how far do we take it? Is it only in the narrow sense? Is it even tishtush dio, which is also a correction of a writing type correction? A writing type fixing up is maybe the best way to do it, a fixing up. Is it only where there was a mistake, or even where it was correct at the time, but now circumstances have changed? I want to repurpose the keresh, right? I no longer want the keresh for here, I want the keresh for here. Is that sort of evasion enough? This is the sugya. And I think what we've achieved is a far more beautiful and smooth and neat sugya. And again, I think this is obvious now that I'm saying. I'm embarrassed that it took us so long, but we were locked into a world in which we were fighting what the Rishonim and the Gemara was saying. And it's a Muslim lesson, by the way, how seriously to take the Rishonim, that when we're stuck in the Rishonim, not to cast Rishonim, ever let a little bit of doubt creep in, oh, maybe this has gone wrong. We were so fiercely not understanding what they were saying. The beauty of this is that all the Rishonim are on the same page. We understand why the Ram starts off assuming what he assumes. We understand why the Rosh is much more casual about his chiddush of Dio than we would have wanted them to be. It's not a major alteration. We understand why the Rambam puts this all into one and doesn't say this is a different melacha. It's simply two different ways of fixing writing. One type of fixing writing is al-manas lichtov, and another type of fixing writing is any mechika, even when it's not al-manas lichtov, as long as it has something positive to it. We understand the Yerushalmi that speaks about the removal of the little corner piece of the Reish and the Daled. We understand the Pri Megadim that extends it to erasing an IOU in the Biur Halacha, and the whole sugya is now going in one direction. This might also help with our final point, in which it says, if we have this model of two types of mechika, then when the Brisa says that the melacha is that you're chai for mochik if you raise one letter that has enough space for two letters in it, the chiddush, we hear loud and clear the depth of the chiddush of the Brisa. And I want to emphasize this again. It's not just a clever Brisa that finds a little neat point, which is that mochik can have a scenario when you be chai for mochik and not for kosev. Because mochik, after all, is clearing the space for letters, and if you have a large letter, there's enough space. The Brisa is bothered by a conceptual point that it wants to bring out, which is that if mochik is correction of writing, maybe it's only correction of two letters, not correction of one letter. And the chiddush of the Brisa is that you can have correction of letters that don't yet exist. I'm erasing one letter in order to write, with space to write, two letters in its place. So is that correcting or fixing one letter, or correcting or fixing two letters? That's a profound conceptual question. The chiddush of the Brisa is that the mechika, the correcting, the fixing, even though the mechika, the erasure, the deletion is of one letter, but the fixing is of two letters. And therefore this is a mechika of two letters, not a fixing of one letter. Isn't that beautiful? It's conceptualizing what mechika is. So I Baruch Hashem, I think we're coming out of the sukkah, we're able to hold our heads high. That we've come out with a reading of the Rishonim and it's really a matana from Shemaim to be able to break one's bias and resistance to ideas and hear what they're saying. And to me, I think this answers, and this is an excellent reading of the sukkah that at the last minute, really, it seems we managed to get something.
It seems also to extend the chamor UMochek mi bechtav. That's the extension. The statement of Menachem Rabbi Yossi, you've extended that also by this definition.
Which statement?
The last statement in the Gemara, in the Brisa.
Yes, because kosev is in the actual kasav you're writing. Mechika is in the non-kasav that you're writing. It's the real tangible flesh and blood, paper and ink that you're working on only has one ois, but the mechika is taking place in the virtual oisius that don't yet exist, and that you may never end up writing. Absolutely, yes.
I'm not quite sure what Chai Adam is saying. Is he therefore saying getting your hands dirty with the soot of a kedera that is an error that needs to be corrected?
The Chai Adam is saying that every time you clear a surface of soot, you are preparing that surface for writing. And that even though here you have no intentionality, nonetheless, the Rabbanon it's asa, because it's a fixing of potential kasav. Now, no one takes the Chai Adam that far. No one goes with this Chai Adam in practical halacha, because there's nothing about the surface which makes it a writing surface. But the concept there remains clear. By the way, we also hear the debate around the chiddush of the Ramah that biting into a biscuit could be a malacha, could be a drabanon of Kosev. You can hear why there's room to accept that and room to be skeptical about it. You're biting into a biscuit, you're destroying the whole kasav. So can that be should that be viewed as an unintentional fixing, in which case it would be drabanon, or is it not mochek at all, because I'm not correcting or fixing kasav, I'm just eating the cake and the kasav is being obliterated. So you hear why the later poskim hesitate over this Ramah, and it remains somewhat difficult to understand, to know what to make of such a scenario. No one thinks in that case you're chayav d'oraisa, right? Of course you're not chayav d'oraisa, because there's no surface that remains. It's not melachot, it's kayemes, it's unintentional. So the question is, to what degree is it removed from mochek? And you can see why the critics of the Ramah would say this is too far removed, because it's not fixing any sub up at all. Again, the Ramah remains quite a radical extension of mochek. I struggle a bit with how to understand the Ramah. That remains a little unclear. Okay, I think that's enough then for today. Sorry, Adam. Yeah. Yeah. Mochek on the last or yeah. Yes.
That it means mochek in the context of sort of correcting writing.
Correct.
Mean that. Can you read anything in the Mishnah says there's only one other example of almanat? Therefore, Korea almanat literal is similar. Could it be? And then those who don't write almanat don't have the same.
I don't know, but we have a project certainly for our holiday break, which is going re-listening to all the shiurim and everything we said on the previous almanat melachos and seeing whether we missed a trick here. I didn't have time to do that. It did fall into my head the comparison to Mata almanat show, because there we edged close towards this insight and then missed it. Around this discussion about whether it's the same knot or a different knot that's being created. But we would really need to look at all these almanat melachos and then also see whether anything emerges about which ones the Mishnah doesn't write almanat. And the moment I'm struggling enough with the one melach of Moshe Kavanah, and I don't have the brain capacity to handle all the other melachos, but we should in truth really go back and revisit all of them.
It says it's almost as though, Tosfos to read it saying don't read too much into the lack of almanat.
That Tosfos does seem to say it's after, yeah. Because again, if almanat is just an example of mekalkel, then mochek doesn't need to avoid mekalkel. The mochek doesn't need the almanat bichtov. The core thing is the essence, the malach of mochek is correcting or fixing writing, and you can fix writing by deleting it with no intention to rewrite because you don't want IOU in existence, or you can fix writing by tweaking it, like the Yerushalmi is a very vivid example of that, by adding the little corner piece to the reish. Okay, so Rabbi, so just to remind you, no share Tuesday, and then the next session will be next Sunday. It's Hashem. I wish everyone a good day. Thank you so much for learning. Chanukah Sameach, everyone. Chanukah Sameach, absolutely.
Thank you.